Welcome to Coaches on Zoom Getting Coffee. Each episode features a candid, unfiltered, and unedited conversation between two coaches. Hosted by Daniel Kimball, CEO of Resonance Executive Coaching.
Well, welcome, Jen Roberts. I'm really happy to have you join us today on the Coaches on Zoom Getting Coffee. Great to have you. Any opening words you have for the audience?
Yeah, great to be here. I'm always grateful to connect with other colleagues and coaches across the nation and the world, and so appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, what's top of mind? What's top of heart for you right now? Of course, we're still in the midst of COVID-19. It's April 15th, just to kind of give people a timestamp. But what's going on with you? What's top of mind? What's top of heart?
It's really interesting because I kind of forgot it was April 15th. I think our world has been so disrupted lately that it's hard to remember that this is what would have been tax day for a lot of individuals.
Right.
The past couple of weeks have been so weird and so challenging for everybody that, every day kind of feels like you scrub out the very first part and it's just day.
Yeah.
And so I think, for me, one of the things that I do, not first thing when I wake up, but very early after I wake up, is to kind of watch the news, see what the headlines are. And I was struck this morning by the conversation on the news about what the reopening of America specifically to us might look like, and what the new normal or the next normal is going to look like following, the pandemic that we've all been experiencing in recent weeks. And just kind of thinking about, as we've been in this experience, how it's changed our lives so dramatically, the things that we've been implementing professionally, the things that we've been implementing personally as our lives have been completely disrupted with family members all being kind of secluded together in the house. And, just how we move forward from this. What does that look like?
Yeah, there's so many things going on, and it feels like it's moving rather rapidly, although at the same time, we're maybe just in California just over a month into stay-at-home orders, and so it's become in its own way sort of an interim normal. At least that's the way I'm experiencing it. But Let's talk now more for the first time really this week coming up about what's the reopening path, what might it look like, what's the possibilities here. And I've been doing my best to kind of get ahead of it and predict as best as I can what's coming, but nobody really knows for sure what's coming. Then you're kind of touching on this, but some of the issues and here in the U.S. is there's no real coordinated response from the federal government. So states and governors within the states, and then mayors within cities, different municipalities are kind of doing their own thing. We went into this whole thing in that situation. I'm encouraged by the news that on the West Coast and on the East Coast, there's a coalition of governors who are coming together to kind of come up with a common strategy, at least across a subset of states, for reopening stuff. Because as we move into the first stages of reopening stuff, it's going to be really critical to do our best with that and not be too aggressive with it, right? Because if we're too aggressive, we could have a much bigger spike, a couple months from now. So we have to be very mindful of that. But yeah, what else is going on in your world right now?
Well, of course, I think about how this has impacted our family, specifically our local community, the bigger kind of geographic area that's immediately surrounding me, and kind of looking at the impacts that's had on business owners and leaders within the companies, that I've served in the past. Some of those things are, currently on hold because of our situation. But, we do a good job, I think, as a family of looking for the benefits in every situation, or trying to find the positives in whatever it is that we're facing. And so I've been thinking a lot about how these things are impacting us, and what positive things are we taking out of this as we kind of return to this new normal, whatever that looks like, or the next phase. What does that mean in terms of professionalism for businesses who've had to very abruptly make changes and put their workers on teleworking schedules or distance working schedules? What does that mean from a human perspective? Because I've seen so many great examples of ways companies are kind of pivoting and showing up in new and positive and supportive ways for their employees, and the situations that they're in with their families. For myself, I've got my husband working from here. My two children, who are teenagers, are distance learning from home. We've got our 2 dogs here, so it's a little
Right.
bit crazy and pandemonium. And so what are the things that we really appreciate about this situation that we want to preserve and take forward with us? And what are the things maybe from a business perspective that, we want to keep doing? And what are some things that we're learning, lessons, in this situation that we want to take back as we sort of resume more
Right.
normal activities?
I think this is a great opportunity on so many levels to reprioritize, or at least get clear about what our priorities are, and choose those things that are most important to us, and then not choose the things that aren't. I know I'm looking at that stuff both professionally and personally, and it's a cleansing process in a way. Let's zoom in on that. Like on a personal level, what are you finding that you really appreciate about what's happening right now?
Well, I mean, obviously, from a personal level, and being a business owner myself and having worked from home for a number of years, this isn't really a new situation for me. And so
Right.
I think I've been able to kind of coach my family through kind of what this looks like when you're trying to self-discipline, when you're trying to work from home, when you're trying to carve out time and space, and there are so many distractions. Because when you are working from home, I think one of the challenges is competing demands. There are things that have to happen from a household perspective. There are things that have to happen for your family. And how do you make sure that you're focused on, the items of work that you need to get done, or as a leader, how you carve out the time to be able to have those important meetings in a space that's relatively professional. And of course, like, I'm set up in my office. My husband is in our bonus room. He's got a pool table and things in the background. And so from that perspective, I think it's been really interesting, even watching like the national news, because I love seeing Al Roker's kitchen or
Yeah.
Savannah Guthrie's
Right.
living room or whatever. I mean, they're so larger than life usually, that I like being able to kind of pull back the curtain and see how some of those people live. And I think that that's really humanized us in a lot of ways from a professional standpoint, because we're meeting with people that we normally meet with, and we're dressed from the waist up,
Right.
right?
Right.
But
Right.
what does that really look like, in terms of their life? So we're kind of getting a peek into, how people live.
That's a good point. I mean, we are getting more of a peek into how people truly live versus more of that polished presence that we can easily default to, especially in the business world. But I think in all aspects of life, you think about social media too. We tend to present only our best selves there, right? And part of the premise of this show is to just kind of do unfiltered, unedited, unscripted conversation. So whatever happens, happens, and
Mm-hmm.
it probably isn't going to look perfect, but that's kind of part of the idea. But how do we embrace more of that is a question that I'm exploring. Like, how do we actually welcome that on a personal level, getting to know people who are public figures, for example, and seeing them in a way that we couldn't see them before, humanizes them, as you said. And we're all kind of on a, I don't want to say a level playing field, that's way too strong of a statement to make, but we can see behind the scenes more than we've seen before, and kind of appreciate that we're all human beings in the end.
Yeah. And I think that's so important as a business leader, and I'm kind of putting on my business hat here in this answer, but I think one of the things that's most important and that your employees most need from you, and I find this with my coaching and consulting clients, as I'm sure you do, they need for you to be vulnerable, and they need for you to be human, and to kind of express those strengths and areas of weakness to kind of make you approachable. And I think that this has really done that. Like, I know as I've talked with clients throughout the week, people have had children, of course, walk into the background. There are pets
Right.
playing in the background. There's pets crawling on people, that I'm talking to. And so it creates a level of humor, and it kind of relieves the situation a little bit, even when you're trying to, get through and make important business decisions that are still important, but it connects people on a whole different level.
And that's a good point. I hadn't thought about it in that light before, that this is an opportunity kind of forced upon us, but also an opportunity to show more vulnerability in the form of, again, getting a more personal view into people's lives. And as a result, it's exposing to us the advantages maybe that we didn't think about before as far as being more vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really simple stuff in some cases, like, as you said, maybe a family member walks behind the screen with their shirt off or something like that, or a pet or a pet starts barking, whatever happens. It's
Right.
kind of like this show, as I said. And how do we embrace more of that is what I'm trying to explore. How do we actually embrace the imperfection and that's in all of us? Because there's always things to pick apart and be grateful for in any given situation, right? And one of the benefits of this situation is exposing, whether we like it or not, all of us as being more human than we maybe were, able to show 6 or 8 weeks ago.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and I hope that that's one of those things that sticks around, because I think that the level of conversations that people have been having, being able to see, hey, my child was up in the middle of the night with a bloody nose, and here's what he looked like in the morning after I tried to wipe it away, and like the blood covered face. I mean, these pictures, just the level of sharing I think that we're experiencing is a really positive thing. I think that will build cohesiveness. And even though we're in this virtual environment, when people return to work, I hope that the mindset there is that we're going to return to work feeling even closer and more close knit and more cohesive than we were before this situation happened. And so what's the
Right.
positive take from
Right.
this back to our workplace and then continue to build upon? Because, as you mentioned, trust is such a foundational piece of teams and teams functions and, their ability to perform effectively. But it's been a lot of fun. Like I've enjoyed the stories. I've enjoyed seeing pictures from people. I've enjoyed having conversations with them and kind of hearing the crazy things that are happening. Of course, there's lots of bloopers from video conferences that are
Right.
going
Right.
on. Another thing that, I've personally appreciated is just from a work-life balance perspective. And like I said, I've always been fairly self-disciplined since I've started this business. But I think for some people who are really now just learning to set aside the time and being able to set their own metrics about getting goals accomplished, this is really important. I'll use my kids as an example because they're teenagers. They're in 9th and 7th grade. But learning how to manage their time around their assignments, I think, is really important. But from kind of a business and leadership perspective, the same thing is true, because leaders are extending hopefully more trust to their teams to accomplish the things that they're supposed to in the time that they're given. But it also allows people more flexibility to be able to do the work that they need to do on their own terms in a way that best suits them and in a time that works best for them from a productivity and engagement standpoint. And being able to kind of focus on that work-life balance piece of, I'm going to do this work and I'm going to knock these things out and I'm going to participate in this meeting, but then I'm also going to take time to exercise or meditate or, whatever some of those more personal elements are that kind of replenish the energy for people.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, I'm thinking, again, the situation's largely forced upon us. At the same time, it's an opportunity to like embrace our different learning styles, our different working styles, and find ways to get our work done in ways that suit us versus what we thought was expected of us in the office environment, for example. And I think a variety of things are likely to change forever, and whatever the new version of normal looks like, say 12 to 18 months or 24 months from now, whenever we get there. A lot of things are going to be different. I think part of it is going to be that we're going to be more and more open to different working styles and more of a results-based productivity. I think many of us right now are still in a state of stress, very understandably so. In response to that, we can be like too micromanaging, too much trying to check in on people, make sure that they're doing their work. At the same time, it's an opportunity to look at it like, okay, that's not necessarily effective in terms of getting the best results. Let's actually embrace the chaos of it a bit and find, embrace other ways of getting work done that doesn't necessarily fit the mold. That might actually be much more effective for that person. And I'm looking at my son. He's 10. He's with me every other week. He spends every other week with his mom. This week is with us, and he's working through, as you were just saying, like the prioritization of different tasks for the day. And I have to kind of help him stay on track and help him plan out his day. Sometimes he gets overwhelmed. Yesterday there was some big emotions about how far behind he felt like he was, and today he's much more on top of it. It's kind of a up and down, but I think part of what I'm learning and he's learning from this is he's got his own learning style, and we're finding ways to work with that, basically.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the same is true here. When we got up this morning, it was 7:30, which may seem late to some people. We slept in a little bit today. But our son was already, he said, I'm done with 2 of my class periods already. And his class isn't even, the blocks aren't supposed to start until 8 a.m. He woke up early and he got started. He's just really appreciating the opportunity to have free time. And of course, we've created sort of an internal family structure. So it's not just video games and TV for the rest of the day. There are other things that they have to do. We're doing a lot of exercises as a family. It hurts to sit down right now because we've been doing a squat regimen to a song called Bring Sally Up, which is a 3.5-minute song. But yeah, I think, from a working perspective and even like for our children, figuring out ways to be able to tap into our most productive times, the ways that we like to work best, will be a good best practice to kind of re-implement when we go back into kind of a more normal schedule. I've seen it both ways, from a communication and a trust standpoint. I've seen greater trust extended by some of my client teams. They're really giving people a lot of latitude about the ways that they approach their work and when they do it and how they get it done. Other teams, to your earlier point, I'm seeing a lot more micromanaging happening. I don't know what's happening and people aren't in my immediate purview. And so I'm going to check in more frequently with them. And so in some cases, I think the communication is bringing people closer together and teams closer together. And in other situations, I've seen it feel, to the person that I'm talking to, like they're being even more, micromanaged. I'm having to check in at very specific times throughout the day, which may or may not, take into consideration everything else that's happening around them.
Right. And when we're stressed as a team member, as a leader, as an organizational culture, we'll tend to go to our default, stressed tendencies even stronger. So if we had a tendency to begin with of micromanaging, that's likely to come out even more strongly, at least first, as a first, stab at how to handle this situation. But again, it's an opportunity to kind of dial that back and recognize, okay, there's different ways of doing this. And so much of the checking in thing, you could check in with someone on your team, say 2 or 3 times a day even, and have it be actually inspirational and helpful if it's done with the right kind of tone. If it's done with a tone of, hey, I'm just checking in to see how things are going, need any support from me, want to chat about anything that's on your mind, I'm happy to do that. Could be 2 minutes, could be 5 minutes, could be half an hour, just depending on what comes up. But again, the tone is everything as far as that goes. Frequency matters. I would say right now, like check in, probably more often than you would by default, but not to kind of see what they're doing with their work, but more like just as a source of support.
Yeah, and that's great. I think there are, fortunately for us, we're in an era where technology really enables a lot of that. I've seen, really creative team use of some of those technology platforms to be able to make the most of the situation that we're in. Of course, somebody mentioned earlier that I think the number of Zoom users went from like 1 million users to like 200 million users in a week or something. Despite that, we're on Zoom right now with absolutely zero glitches. I mean, kudos to the Zoom team. Sometimes that level of scale can be a company's downfall. But, I've really been impressed by, teams using Zoom, teams using Slack, Microsoft Teams, like all sorts of different platforms to really be able to check in with their folks and make sure that they're on task and on target with regard to their goals, but also just checking in with them kind of on that human level and making sure that people are doing okay. Because there's a lot of things that are happening right now, like in the midst of all of these things, a lot of losses, sicknesses in people's families that they're worried about. And so that human connection matters.
It's even more important now than it's ever been. Yeah. I want to go back to what you said a few minutes ago with some of your routines within your household, because I know I'm struggling with how do I keep the routine? How do I create a set of routines that supports us all well? And I'd say I'm not doing a great job of that. So say more about what you're doing within your household. You mentioned the squats exercises you're doing as a family for one of the songs. What else are you doing that's working as far as structure within your household?
That's funny. Like, I'm really fortunate to have kids who appreciate structure.
That's not
and
my
I think
son.
I think a lot of kids appreciate structure, but mine are maybe like more off the chart. And so like from a school perspective, their assignments are posted at the beginning of the day. I think for my daughter's school, they're a little bit more flexible about when they complete those. For my son's high school assignments, they're more following the block schedule. Again, like they're providing flexibility because of connectivity issues, et cetera, et cetera. But for our family, we've assigned 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. as kind of school time. If they finish in 2.5 or 3 hours, which they have been pretty consistently because they just buckle down, they do their work, they get it done, then they have a little bit of free time in there. For my son, who's a little bit older, he's taking some AP classes. And so part of his curriculum that we've assigned him is studying for his AP exam. And doing AP prep work if he finishes his classwork. They also are required to do 30 minutes of exercise a day, spend 15 minutes outside. Of course, those can happen concurrently. They have to spend 30 minutes doing any kind of household chores or work that we need to get done around here. And my son, who also has his learner's permit, has to drive at least an hour a week. And so there's, kind of that. But then we also have free time periods and then no screen time periods where they're expected to do either something creative or read a book or play outside with the dog, whatever they want to do. They just can't. So that's kind of the structure that we've created. Now, the additional exercise regimen that we're doing, my husband and I have been walking between 4 and 5 miles a day, which we've never had the opportunity to do together unless we're on vacation or over a weekend. And so from a fitness perspective, I would say as a family, we're probably going to come out well ahead of where we have been.
Right.
But yeah, the PE assignment that my daughter had earlier in the week introduced us to the song that I mentioned, Bring Sally Up, which is a 3.5-minute workout song. Basically, anytime they say up, if you're doing squats, you stand up. If they say down, you squat down. If they don't say up again, you hold it. You can do that with leg raises. You can do that with push-ups. So there's any number of like combinations that you can introduce there. So we've had a lot of fun with that, and we're all very sore.
That sounds like fun, and I think every kid, every adult as well, is different in terms of the amount of structure we welcome. I think kids in general, I agree with you, like do benefit from more structure rather than less. And right now, for many families, and I know, as I said, I've been struggling with this, like what's the right amount of structure, and so that's helpful to hear.
Yeah.
I'm curious to kind of switch gears. I mean, we're in different parts of the U.S. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. You're in the South. Where are you at exactly again?
Right outside of Savannah, Georgia.
And so the reactions across the different municipalities and states to this whole situation has been very different. Like what's your take on that as far as, your perspective where you're at? And I'll kind of share what my thoughts are based on where I'm at.
Yeah, I mean, I try to remain very apolitical with regard to my business. Personally, I would say in our local community, we've been fairly locked down. We have a government and, mayors that have taken very seriously the issue of social distancing, only having essential businesses open, which has been really helpful. I think, of course, that's impacting, our ability to flatten the curve, even though we haven't had nearly as many cases in our area as you probably have had in your urban, more crowded areas. On the state level, I would say Georgia was a little bit slower to react than some of the other states. And so I'm glad that we're finally on the bandwagon with regard to that. But I think that it is still very important for people to continue the social distancing and continue kind of operating in this way that we are right now. I'm just trying to appreciate every day that we're given, where we have the opportunity together. Of course, for myself, family is one of my personal core values. And so I'm trying to celebrate the fact that we've been given this opportunity to be together. I know that there are a lot of hardships for other businesses and individuals who have been impacted on a much greater extent than we have been. And so the sooner, the more we stay apart right now, the sooner we can get back together and kind of get back to normal. But what about you?
Yeah, that's the way I'm looking at it. To summarize, I do believe that the more we honor social distancing now, the more that pays off in the future. Mm-hmm. California and the San Francisco Bay Area was, in particular, the San Francisco Bay Area was very quick to respond relative to the rest of the nation. And there's a lot of different speculation out there as to why the California numbers are so low relative to population. One thing to be transparent is I think we still do not have as much testing going on here as some other locations do. So there's probably more cases than we are aware of, more so than is happening in some other regions. But also I think the social distancing that we started early is paying off, and we have been, as far as we can tell, fairly successful in flattening the curve. Mm-hmm. And I'm hopeful, given our governor's response and what he's saying as far as the path to reopening, what that might look like, that we'll do our best around that and open in a mindful way and be willing, if necessary, to kind of roll things back to more strict social distancing if we have to. Mm-hmm. And especially heartened, as I said earlier, about how the West Coast and East Coast, there's a set of governors who are working together to try to do this in a more coordinated fashion.
Right.
And I've noticed in conversations I have, like most people I talk to that are in my social circles and our clients, et cetera, we're more or less on the same page. I don't see a lot of disparate opinions as far as what to make of all this, but I do see in sort of the bigger chatter out there a lot of different thoughts about this, and even conspiracy theories and all kinds of things that just don't make a lot of sense to me when I think it through, because even if I entertain the bigger conspiracy theory ideas, I can go there in my mind. But what I doubt is our ability as a species, to carry off something that sophisticated on a mass scale is not an easy thing for humans to do, whether it's for good or for evil. So I'm just skeptical for that reason, and other reasons too. I do have a foundational trust in science. I do have a foundational trust at some level. It's not as good as it used to be in our government, and I do believe for the most part, everyone is doing the best they know how to do, given the information they have and their own filters, et cetera. So I trust that for sure. Yeah, I do see different opinions around that. And it's kind of where I wanted to go next is like, what are you finding very frustrating about this situation? For me, one of my frustrations is that, like, I don't know. I have a hard time not being frustrated by people who don't see things in a similar way as I do. And that sounds like it's one-sided, and probably it is.
Hmm.
But I do see that there's differences of opinion around this that I find very frustrating, because it is something that the more we collectively do what we're being asked to do at this point, the more it benefits us as a species. And so our individual decisions have collective impact in a way that we're much more aware of now, and I'm much more aware of. And so I'm less tolerant, I would say, of people who don't necessarily seem to get this, the importance of social distancing. But what are you frustrated by in this whole situation?
I mean, I probably share some of your concerns and frustrations with regard to the US's slow response to
Yeah,
this relative to some of the other countries in the world. I don't think that this was necessarily a conspiracy. I do think that people are trying to take it seriously. I think the hard thing for me, and a frustration point, is seeing kind of the slow adoption of social distancing in my area specifically, because people weren't seeing the immediate effects of that. And so the inability to take it seriously, or take seriously the impact that might have.
yeah,
And even now, like this morning, when I mentioned, when we turned on the news, the conversation is, how do we reopen America? And I'm like, we just barely have closed America. Like, we're talking about reopening it already. I mean, we
right,
just got it closed down. And
right,
I know that people are going stir crazy, and I know this is really hard to, be so shaken up. And we are very social animals, right? And so that need for connection is great. And I recognize that. And, as we're walking around, even in our neighborhood, there are people that are still together that I know aren't family. And that frustrates me beyond anything else, to know
yeah,
that, I think the lack of respect for, in some cases, science, but for the opinion of experts, particularly, I think you and I would kind of view ourselves as experts in our field. I think the total disregard of expert opinion and data and facts has been disconcerting and frustrating to me,
yeah,
because
me
that's
too.
that's what matters. And what's the point of becoming an expert if nobody's ever going to trust your opinion? And
Right.
so I think that it's important for us as individuals and as companies to trust expert guidance, and to really heed those things, and recognize that nobody wants the country to suffer. And so social distancing and kind of the level of uncomfortability, I don't know what the word is, discomfort
Discomfort. Yeah,
that we're having, what is the word that we're having right now, is sort of it's important. We're playing the long game here. And so how do we keep the masses safe and have a less disastrous impact moving forward? And that can be argued on both sides of the coin, I know. But from the perspective of just making sure that we're keeping humans safe first, because humans are the ones that actually even do the work.
yeah.
That's something that I think has been a mantra in my business for a long time, and probably yours as well.
A couple of things you touched on there that I want to dive into more deeply. One thing I've been thinking about is, from a human behavior standpoint, collectively, like, what are we good at as a species, and what are we not so good at as a species? And I think some of that's playing out right now with this whole
Mm-hmm.
situation. One thing I think we're very good at as a species is responding to urgency. Like, if something seems truly urgent, we'll respond quickly, generally speaking, in a collective fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the struggles we have with it. On the one hand, this whole situation came up very quickly, and we have responded on a public health way relatively rapidly. You think about 2 months ago what our lives looked like versus what it looks like today. That's a huge amount of change for the whole country, the whole world, in so
Right.
many ways. And we did that very, very quickly. So in a
Mm-hmm.
sense, we saw the urgency of it, right? But I think the people who are still struggling with accepting this, or maybe questioning how necessary social distancing really is, I think part of that goes back to, if you don't see it in your immediate world, if no one you know is sick, if you don't see in your immediate hospital
Right.
that there's some kind of a overburdening going on there in response to this pandemic, um, you're more likely to start questioning, like, does this really make sense? Is there something else
Mm-hmm.
going on here that doesn't, because this doesn't seem to make sense on the surface. I think another way in which we struggle is, like, just foundational understanding of what exponential growth looks like. So that's why social distancing can be very effective, especially if it happens early, because if you catch exponential growth early with social distancing, it really cuts that ability to grow, like, rapidly, like we've seen in other regions of the country,
Mm-hmm.
compared to California, for example. But that part, I think, on a foundational level, we have trouble visualizing or really understanding what that looks like, and how that exponential growth how critical just a matter of a couple of days can be as far as reducing that growth over time. And again, it goes back to the immediacy. Like you don't see it right now, right in front of you, someone in your neighborhood sick and or dying necessarily, but a week from now, 2 weeks from now, a month from now, that's when the payoff comes. And we struggle with that, I think, as far as what's immediate versus what's urgent, right? We see the immediacy of it to some extent, but we don't see it as urgent necessarily.
Well, and I think, not to go, I like going back to the positives, but I think like this has really underscored the importance of some of the basic service positions in our community. Like for instance, like I haven't gotten my hair cut in a really long time. I'm a short hair girl. This needs to be cut every 4 to 6 weeks. Like I'm well past the point where I should have gotten it cut. And when social distancing first went into effect, I had an appointment scheduled. My daughter also had an appointment scheduled. And out of an abundance of caution, we canceled those appointments. And I felt really terrible because I know that that person relies on the income that we provide, for her services. But we canceled that. And ultimately, she tested positive for COVID-19 and she's in her mid-30s, and you think about the number of people that she came into contact with over the past couple of weeks while she was still servicing clients, and the number of people that they're still in contact with because they weren't seeing the immediate effects of social distancing. That's a huge impact to our very small community here. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to play out. But it's really important to, this is one of those situations where one person really does make a huge difference. And so one person's recklessness or one person's caution could, mean a lot of impact on different lives. So
another thing on my mind related to all this is, when we come out of this, what are we going to carry forward as far as our understanding of pandemics in the future? Because this is not going to be the last one. It's the first one of this scale, and I think in anyone's lifetime, but this is not likely to be the last one. There could be another one 2 years from now, 10 years from now, 20, 50 years from now, but there will be more of this scale again. In some cases, it could definitely be worse. So how do we carry forward some of the learnings, like say 10 years from now? It's hard to keep that urgency, as I was saying before, to keep this stuff top of mind enough to be ready to respond, more ready to respond next time, and also more careful about things like personal hygiene and our form of greeting that involves touch that's not necessarily necessary, right? We could be looking at other ways to have salutations that are not involving touch, right?
Air fives or whatever the case might be. Yeah, I think those are all great points, and hopefully, mass media has the tendency to sensationalize things, and then we move on to the next item or whatever that is, and we forget about the impact of this. I think for better or for worse, this is a history-defining situation. There was life before this, and then there's going to be whatever life looks like after this. And I think that this will continue to have an effect for years to come. I don't think that it's likely that people will forget what this looks like, particularly given the human toll and the impact on people's personal lives and families. And I do think that there needs to be kind of reminders about, what are the best practices or things that we need to do proactively to prepare for something like this should it happen again, because I think the likelihood of that is much greater after we've experienced something like this before. So what does that mean in terms of local communities and at the federal level and globally, in terms of how we respond to crises like this? On an organizational level, I would say, we do a lot around succession planning. This has been a real eye-opener for companies who've had to very quickly decide who and which positions are critical to the nature of the operations of that business. And if they didn't have a plan in place, how important it is to really make sure that you have one, because people can truly be at work one day and not be there the next day. And what does that mean, not only for that person and that individual's family and their immediate contacts, but also for the operations of the business.
It's bubbling to the surface so many things that, again, going back to my earlier point, like what's urgent versus immediate. In that case of succession planning, it's something that we all recognize as being important,
right?
But it doesn't necessarily bubble to the top to the degree that it should, because we're not faced with some immediate crisis like we have right now. Now it's really top of mind, and much more than it has been in the past. But it definitely should have been more top of mind in the past, right? It shouldn't be something you're scrambling to put together now or get better at now. It should be proactively doing that, because stuff like
I don't know if it's ironic that this is 2020. We always talk about hindsight being 2020,
like
but
I
I think about that, as we're kind of living in this situation day in and day out. Like what are the lessons that we're going to learn? What are the things that we want to preserve and take forward? What are the things that we want to make sure, we're changing or doing away with or preparing, differently for the future? And so I think that those are all great questions.
One other thing I want to ask you, like, what do you want to get better at? Like, what's a key thing you want to improve on personally?
That's a good question.
We talked before the show. We were, talking for a bit, and you were saying you were nervous about an unscripted, unedited conversation like we're having now. This has flowed very well from my perspective.
That's funny.
I'm not, wherever that fear comes from, I'm not sure how justified it is. But
you're not supposed to be revealing my fears to your entire audience, Daniel.
Well, to be clear, no. I have similar. I think we all have fears. That's the point. It's like we all have fears, and I have similar fears of how I look on camera, and it gets slowly easier the more I do it. And part of my reason for doing this show is to get myself more comfortable with being on camera when I know that there's no editing going to happen, and just kind of let the conversation flow. So trial by fire,
I think like
for everybody,
personally, right? from a personal learning and application perspective, I think it's easy to talk about vulnerability, and it's easy to talk about how important it is to be human and be imperfect, and it's much harder to actually be human and imperfect.
Right. In theory, it's easy, right?
Yeah, I mean, even as a consultant and a coach who helps leaders do that, it's much easier to coach somebody on that than to actually embody it. Yeah. And so I think you are helping me step out of my comfort zone with doing this. And part of the fear is this is being recorded and immortalized forever, and if I sound stupid, like everybody can replay it over and over again, like not knowing the word discomfort. So what does that look like? But but I think for me, it's really, this has been a good opportunity and a good lesson for me to truly practice selfless service with my clients, with my recent past clients, with people that are just colleagues of mine in the community, because, I've seen a lot of really great examples of partnerships, of corporate giving, of generosity, connections being made, partnerships being formed that wouldn't have been formed before. And so I think for me, this has been a good opportunity to just say, here's what I have to offer, and here's how I can show up and help you right now. And that's what I want to do, is just be of service and be able to help people as humans through this situation first, and then we'll focus on business later when it resumes.
That came off better than anything scripted would have come off. So that was very eloquent. Thank you for that. Yeah. And I know for myself that I struggle sometimes, and I've noticed a tendency, I think, in a lot of coaches, we tend to be very good at pulling other people out of themselves and helping them feel comfortable, but we're not so good necessarily at our own discomfort, our own growing edges. And that, again, is part of the reason why I created the show for myself and others, to kind of grow into the person we need to be free form and have this kind of conversation and not worry too much about how it looks. But what have you seen as far as coaches go? Like collectively, I do notice a general tendency, and for myself, it can show up in the sense that I consider myself a storyteller, but I don't necessarily proactively share stories that often, which is a very interesting dichotomy. But what have you noticed in terms of coaches? Do we tend as a general collective to do that, you think? Kind of avoid our own vulnerability?
I mean, I have a lot of amazing colleagues, and I would say as a group, we're probably more attuned to having a level of self-awareness where we can recognize where we have weak points and seek out, the same types of services that we offer. I know probably for you and for myself also, we have a number of different, colleagues and mentors that we surround ourselves with that we can lean on for support. I was on a Patrick Lencioni call just before we started recording this, and so I think coming from a place of continuous improvement and continuous learning, there's always something that I can hear, if not for the first time, even again, and apply new meaning to it, given the situation that I'm in. So, I've seen most of my colleagues are sort of embracing that and just taking this opportunity to pause and say, where can we apply new learning or new awareness to ourselves so that we can better serve and help other people.
Yeah, again, I think you said that very eloquently, like you really, nailed
mean
it.
Like I really mean it.
And you hit on some key points there. One is like if we focus on continuous improvement, continuous learning, always being of service. That's true whether we're a coach or whatever we do. The more we're focused on learning and improvement as well as being of service, the better we're going to feel, the more productive we're going to be, the more we're going to impact people. and be willing to be vulnerable along the way. That's the key.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for your time today. I really appreciate it. Any final words you want to leave the audience with? And also, where can they find you if they want to learn more about you?
I don't know that I have really eloquent final words. I would just say, thank you for this opportunity. I hope that this is helpful and that our conversation strikes meaning with whoever might listen to it. They can apply it wherever they are in their lives, or if they're a leader leading business, that they know it's okay to show up imperfectly and just be human. I think that's kind of the take home of the conversation that we've had.
Yeah.
That's what people appreciate the most about leaders, is when they're able to kind of be in the trenches with them and kind of figure out as humans how to work through situations. My company is called Difference Consulting. And so, like I said, we're based right outside of the Savannah, Georgia area. And we're a full service organizational development consultancy firm. We do executive coaching, leadership workshops, and also strategic consulting. So if you're in the neighborhood and need any type of service like that, of course, we service the entire country and beyond. So please reach out if there's anything that we can do to help.
Thank you. Appreciate the time today. Good talking to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Daniel. Take care.
You too.